Let's shift focus over to West Asia. Here's the latest from Syria. Airstrikes by the government and its allies have killed at least 103 civilians in the last 10 days. These are numbers presented by the United Nations. It said that among those killed, 26 were children.
The High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, is today ringing the alarm at the apparent international indifference to the rising civilian death toll caused by a succession of airstrikes in Idlib and other parts of northwestern Syria, namely Hama and parts of rural Aleppo. Despite repeated calls by the United Nations to respect the principle of precaution and distinction in their conduct of hostilities, this latest relentless campaign of airstrikes by the government and its allies has continued to hit medical facilities, schools and other civilian infrastructure such as markets and bakeries.
Now, the spokesperson for the UN Human Rights Commissioner added that it seems unlikely that the attack on civilian objects are an accident. The Syrian government began its offensive in the northwestern part of the country in April. This is the last rebel-held region in Syria. The Syrian government justified the attacks by saying what it was responding to was violations of a truce. Idlib and the surrounding areas of northwestern Syria were included in a de-escalation deal that was struck last year. This deal was between Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's main ally, Russia, and Turkey. The idea was to reduce bombardment and warfare, but this proved to be futile. In the last 3 months, hundreds of thousands of people have been affected by the offensive. People have been driven away from their homes. Thousands are currently taking refuge near the Turkish border. To top this, the death toll appears to be mounting with every passing day. Both the Syrian government and its Russian ally have denied targeting civilians. Let's look east and bring you the latest from Hong Kong as one of the world's busiest airports braces for another weekend of potentially combustible protests. Thousands of protesters rallied inside the Hong Kong International Airport to protest against the government. Human linen walls appeared at the airport with volunteers standing amongst protesters covered in messages of support. Sticky note mosaics popped up on walls across the entire airport and on the volunteers amid rolling protests against the government's handling of a controversial extradition bill. The protesters are demanding the government to provide an explanation for the violent attacks on residents during last Sunday's protests. The airline staff have also joined hundreds of other pro-democracy protesters dressed in black. Protesters are aiming to educate visitors in the Hong Kong airport about their cause. Hundreds have occupied the arrival hall's grounds, chanting slogans like "Free Hong Kong." The former British colony is undergoing its worst ever political crisis in 2 decades. For nearly 2 months now, violent protests have challenged Beijing's authority over Hong Kong. The protests had initially begun against the controversial extradition bill, and although the bill has now been suspended, the protests have continued for 7 straight weeks. They have now morphed into fierce anti-China protests. More demonstrations are expected today. China's ambassador to the UN has criticized the protests against Hong Kong's controversial extradition bill, calling the attacks unacceptable and totally intolerable.
To me, I should say that all this, what happened most recently, is totally unacceptable and totally, intolerable. You can hardly imagine each and every democratic world or society could allow this kind of vandalizing and violent attack on the local government, on the legislative bodies, and on the office of the central government. So if you call Hong Kong a democracy, then I don't think this kind of vandalism and violence attack on government buildings is a kind of representation of democracy.
Meanwhile, China has reacted to the US's comments on its handling of the pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. In a statement, China's foreign ministry has said that it will not allow foreign forces to interfere in its domestic matters.
中央政府呢支持特区政府依法履职，依法采取措施维护香港的稳定与安全繁荣。前几天呢，我在这儿也强调过，香港是中国的香港，中国绝不会容许任何外国势力插手和干预香港事务。那么，对于现在有些欧美人士、外界的人士呢？